Welcome to our National Conversation, a podcast in which we discuss politics from all angles. We are completely nonpartisan, and all views, respectfully stated, are welcome here. Our podcast is unique in that it is hosted and run by students who are focused on finding solutions to the biggest problems facing America. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of Allow Us to Explain. My name is Jordan, and I serve as the Director of Media here at ONC. Now, in today's episode, we're going to be touching upon a new up-and-coming subject when it comes to the educational field. Now, this comes as college students around the country are returning to campus, and grade school students are beginning to return to their schools for the first time or for their however many year they're in when it comes to that school. So when we are talking about education, we are now talking about AI. Now, what is AI? AI, a new technology, which some say could help students in the long run when it comes to what they're learning, but it could also harm them at the same exact time when it comes to the information that they're receiving from this new technology. So we'll go all over all that in a second and talk about the pros and cons of it and how it could really impact the educational field. But first, let's introduce our panelists. Today, we are joined by ONC's Economics Team Lead, Sabrina Falkowski, and ONC's Infrastructure Team Lead and Director of Community Events, Tania Ortiz. Now, Sabrina, would you mind introducing yourself first?
Hi, I'm Sabrina. I'm an econ and poli-sci student, and I'm the Economics Team Lead for the summer 2023 session at ONC. And for this podcast, I actually am a former engineering student prior to changing my majors. And one of the discussion I had with some of my other friends who were in engineering school a few years ago was about how our friends, we didn't see a lot of ethics education and training for engineering, artificial intelligence, computer science in general, and new technologies. And so that's just something I'm personally very interested in, is seeing that ethics training brought into undergraduate programming.
Tania, would you mind introducing yourself as well?
Yeah, hey y'all, I am Tania. I got a major in political communication. So that just means I like to talk, but I like to talk in a way where everyone understands me, right? My interest in AI and education really comes down into the status of the US education system and what we could be doing to improve the education styles for our students, but also for the teachers.
So let's jump right in then. And actually, that's the perfect segue to our first talking point. Now, when it comes to AI, so what is AI in the classroom? So it has a few different connotations when we're talking about it. The first one being how students can now use this new technology to do their assignments for them, or even give them answers to their homework or test questions. With that, there's also now the concern that this new technology can give them information that is plagiarized and could further harm their educational pursuits. So when people are now talking about this, they're now wondering, where do the teachers stand when it comes to this new technology? Could teachers possibly be replaced in the future by this new technology? How is it impacting them and their jobs? So let's just start off with just a nice basic question about this subject first. Based on the quick little overview that we just gave to our listeners about how this is impacting the educational field, should AI actually be allowed further in the classroom?
I would say from the infrastructure perspective, I would say that it's great to see the implementation of AI and the emergence really of AI in policy creation.
AI is a tool, and like with any tool, it has to be taught how to use responsibly for any user. I don't think there's necessarily a problem with the implementation of AI in classroom setting, but there is a problem when there is no proper education on how to use that tool.
And so with this, we're now talking about the challenges and the downsides of it. As I said, teachers and instructors see it as a threat to their jobs. It can make them appear to be redundant. And also the cost to develop and implement this new technology is high. And there also is that lack of human interaction. And then it can also be more ramifications when we're now talking about the teacher burnout that we are seeing around the country. We've discussed the subject here on Allow to Explain. So now, when we're now talking about this, how would both of you say, when we're talking about refining it in our policy arenas and refining it in the classroom, how would you say we could use this technology to benefit teachers rather than harm them? Because I think right now, a lot of the information that's starting to come out is that it's harming educators. But how could we possibly use it to help them either with their burnout, help them, teach their students new information? How can we help them out when it comes to this new technology?
It's exactly as you're saying, right? Burnout, right? We're seeing more teaching unions striking, saying that the lifestyle that these education systems are pushing onto them is not sufficient, right? They can't really have that balance of personal life versus private life. We're really overbearing our teachers, but also overbearing our students. We're probably expecting too much of them, wanting them to conform to one certain teaching style, right? Because as we know, there's so many ways a student can learn. There's auditory, there's visual learners, there's learners who need to touch things, right? So, education is a whole other realm, right? So when we're looking at AI education, we could be looking at how we are revisioning education, on how we could be reapproaching education in the new world, right? Because it's 2023, the US isn't even making the top 3 in terms of the best education systems, or in terms of who's ranking the best in science and math and reading and writing, right? So we then have to think, what could we be doing to improve how students learn, but also improve how teachers teach, right? So that's where we can be thinking, okay, if money isn't going to get us there, maybe it's how we're, learning, how we're teaching, maybe AI can be that tool to elevate teachers and elevate students in the same time.
Off what Tania said, it could also be used, I don't necessarily want to say as a crutch, but as like a jumping off point in how to diversify teaching styles. Because as she mentioned, students, especially in elementary school, have very diverse learning styles. And um, I'm not an expert on this by any means, but students develop those learning styles and settle into what fits them best. And they need that space and that nurture to learn how to learn. Without that space and with the teacher burnout, they're not going to learn, and they're going to be ill-equipped to go on to middle school, high school, and higher education.
Other countries have already started to implement this new technology in their own educational classrooms or other resources for them. So when we're talking about this, what is kind of, I guess, the current status or situation, if you will, when it comes to how this is being actually drawn out in other places, and how the US could build off of it in our own infrastructure?
Of course. So the intersection of education and artificial intelligence may seem odd, right? But when we look into how education operates, the ranking of education in the United States, and how the US is really the leader of artificial intelligence, this intersection begins to make sense. So the involvement of AI is not a matter of if, but when, right? When are we actually going to be seeing this happen in classes? Much like what we see in Japan, what we see in Taiwan, India, and China, right? China, for example, they have master programs, PhDs in artificial intelligence at a higher scale than the United States, even though we are the biggest investor in AI, right? And we see Japan implementing in this year AI in education, right? And teaching AI awareness for their students, as in teaching them how to use AI for themselves, but for their education. So not more in the sense of, AI tools that can adapt to their learning, but also how they themselves can use AI and also keep their privacy intact. So when we see this shift happening, where other countries are beginning to adapt to this, and countries like Japan that are ranked #1 in education, we have to be looking then, okay, if they're doing it, maybe we should also be doing that. But I also want to bear in mind that how Japan operates is very different than the United States, much like China, right? China's decentralized government, they could implement this at a better pace than we can, right? Because we have 50 states and 50 different ways to approach education. So this implementation of AI will need to come from a cohesive agreement that AI is good and AI could improve education in the United States. And let's look at the US real quick. So while education is one of the top heavily funded public infrastructure projects of the United States, it only counts for about 8.9% of total funding for public schools. So if money isn't the issue, then we have to be looking at how we're teaching, right? And how students are learning. So when we look at the ways AI can help us, they have these issues of adaptive tutoring, right? Teaching assistance and administrative tasking. And when it goes to adaptive learning is, as we said before, adapting to the student needs, right? Because the teacher can adapt their teaching style to 30 plus students, right? So this AI tool has, keeps in mind the student goals, where they are in terms of the education level, and adapts it to them, right? It's not as personable. You're not having someone in front of you. You're having a stimulation of a person in front of you, right? But I would say it's still good in the sense that it's alleviating a burden for teachers, right? Saying that you're teaching them the basis, but you're allowing us, AI, to take that deeper level understanding. While that could be a contention there as well, because some parents want that personal touch, right? Want to have that teacher who's there, present, ask them questions. But adaptive tutoring in AI has been said to offer those personal questions. But again, it's not the same as having someone there. And in terms of teaching assistance, this is supposed to help teacher burnout, right? Because teachers have a lot on their plate, building a curriculum every week, not just every month, every week, because things happen, things change, right? So giving the teachers this ability to push that task off to something else, a stimulated human, right, could really help with their task load. But also this could hurt teaching assistants who are in master's programs, right? Or will they be out of a job now? Will they no longer get paid because they're no longer competitive in the field, right? That's the big contention when it comes to teaching assistants. But then again, we have to remember public schools don't have a lot of money. So when they don't have a lot of money, they have to then turn to programs that can do the job that they otherwise will have to pay for. Now, this could either hurt the teaching field in the future. We don't know because we haven't really applied it, and no place really has applied this. So we can't really see the impacts of what this could be. And in terms of administrative tasks, it's what we know to be administrative tasks to be, right? Scheduling, sending out emails, sending out those newsletters, right? Again, it alleviates another burden for teachers to do, right? These are some of the ways it could look like. And we pulled this from educationnext.org, right? Where they talked about the way that this could look like if we were to really implement, really invest into this. But again, with the prevalence of teacher strikes and burnout, this seems to be beneficial to teachers and students, because let's not forget, teachers feel burnout too. Teachers feel overwhelmed. So we must be thinking of what we can do to improve not only how teachers are teaching, but students are learning, right? Perhaps this could help the U.S. education system rank up the rankings, right? Become #1, right? Which maybe seem a bit too competitive on my part, but I want the U.S. to be #1, right? What American doesn't want the United States to be ranked #1? But that's just my own perspective.
Let's turn it over to the economic side, if we will. Just because, as we discussed previously in prior podcasts, AI is starting to now impact other areas of the world. Last week we spoke with Anna Wilding from SAG-AFTRA about the strikes, because one of the biggest talking points with that is AI. So with that, Sabrina, can we kind of go over the economic benefits that we're seeing when we are looking to increase AI usage in these different work sectors?
So first and foremost, the artificial intelligence industry in 2022 was valued at about 86.9 billion USD, and it's projected to hit 400 billion by 2027. That is a very fast growing industry, and that's just at the rate it is, with consumers who are still afraid of AI or don't understand AI. They don't understand that they use things such as Siri or Amazon Alexa, both of which are very low level, low technology artificial intelligence programs. Um, Things like, I forgot what the Google one is called, the Google equivalent as well. Um, and on one hand, this is going to open up different job opportunities, but on the other hand, it could close out jobs. For example, when we were talking to Anna, and a concern that the film industry has last week is that not only would this remove human connection, there's this concern about signing away life rights, not necessarily having to pay for studios, not necessarily having to pay for your image. And so while artificial intelligence is a tool in a massive industry that's just growing and growing and growing, um, it's it needs to be used responsibly, and that's where I think universities need to come in. These research institutions need to come in and really reinforce the importance of ethics, reinforce the importance and like drawbacks to AI, reinforce that this is a tool that it's neither good nor bad on its own. It's um, it's the tool of the programmers. It's the tool of the firms that use it.
It's much akin to what we saw in the Industrial Revolution, right? How we moved from handmade objects to now machines producing things. So that concern is valid, right? That if AI can take your job, what happens to you? What happens to the person? Right. And I think that's something we had to be thinking. I think you're right, Sabrina, in terms we have to be looking at the ethical, application of AI and how we can really do this. And one article that I found, I believe it was by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's asking everyone to look at the systemic biases or the systemic influences that we do to AI, right? Because we can easily say, if your job can be taken by AI, maybe it wasn't a good job after all. And now that's a very, very powerful statement to make, but also it's not true, right? AI could take the job of writers, but it's not going to understand the emotional writing that writers put into there, right? Because AI is just a reflection of human emotions, of the human mind. It's a stimulation, right? So it can really understand human perspectives, right? Because all it takes is what's already from what the web is, right? It's like when you look at generated art from AI, it's pulling from what's already on there. It's not giving anything new, right? So the idea that AI could take jobs, I don't think it's actually true. So I don't really believe that's something that we have to be worried about in terms of AI taking the jobs of writers or of artists. We could be concerned about AI taking the jobs of teaching assistants, right? Because it's really taking over that function, right? Of how teachers get help, right? It could be taking that job, right? But then we have to be then looking at how then teaching assistants can use AI to help them, right? But also in terms of the economic benefits of AI, remember, the US is the leading inventor of AI, right? And leading applicator of AI. So them using AI to further their own economy or even to improve the lives of workers could be really great. We probably could be seeing boost of women in in computer engineering or computer sciences, but it has been said that women are 1.5 times more likely than men to require transitioning into new occupations due to AI automation. So that's something we have to be taking in mind too. Are we just, taking AI to just do AI, or are we doing it with a purpose, right? Should we have, or could we be implementing AI with ethics, right? I'm not really sure how we can do that.
Completely agree. And I love your comparison to the Industrial Revolution, because that's really what it is. It's a technological revolution with AI. And I agree that it's not necessarily a concern, especially in the arts. I don't necessarily think that's I don't necessarily think that's a long-term concern. It's like, especially in the arts, with anything that requires human connection, even if employers, if companies, if like corporations try to implement that AI, I don't necessarily think they'll be successful. This is another argument that people have against AI, the implementation of AI in like the film industry, is that people will be able to tell when a script is generated by AI, as opposed to when a real human person or a team of writers write a script. You can tell the difference. I don't know if you've ever, just for fun, decided to run ChatGPT, try to generate a script, or read an auto-generated script. They're terrible. I don't think those could connect well to any audience. I don't think they would make money. Uh, and that's the other thing. And I agree that I would love to see more women in computer science. I would love to see more women going into the field of artificial intelligence and into programming, because I do think that could also start to address and eliminate some of those inherent biases in artificial intelligence programs that do exist, and in creation of new programs and updating programs. More people of color, more LGBTQ plus people, more women of color. Diversifying the field of artificial intelligence could address the ethical problems with the programming itself. And so, while yes, some jobs, especially some jobs will be computerized, that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Not in the it's a bad job anyway. I don't think any job is a bad job, but in that it'll probably open up that industry, diversify that industry, and potentially open up more jobs, more training, even within corporations, even within companies, not necessarily bachelor's degrees, but certificate programs for people within those companies to run those programs.
Going off of a few points I wanted to address. One being, I've read those AI scripts because two of my friends are in the TV field, or going into TV field. And as you said, Sabrina, yes, they are not funny whatsoever in the slightest. That I can say, not just from a bias standpoint, but just from a factual standpoint, really. And then Tania, I also want to touch upon one of your points as well that you were talking about. That kind of actually draws into this next question. Kind of the personalization of AI and how it is starting to really trying to personalize his approach when talking to students, kind of as if they are being talked by an actual adult or teacher. Because I actually saw something on online not that long ago. I think it was only maybe a week or so ago. That a good percentage of students right now, they consider their own educators like a second parental figure, or maybe even a first parental figure for them. So there are some drawbacks now when we are talking about AI. One of those being how it could really develop, or how we're starting to wonder when this is going to full on develop into making those interactions more personalized as they were if it was the actual teacher. But there still is other drawbacks, such as gender and other notions, biased, when we're talking about the teaching program or teaching or educational field, excuse me, cheating as a whole. So Sabrina, what are some of these drawbacks, and how can it really affect economics as a whole?
I'm honestly not too sure what the drawbacks would be beyond, like, for example, plagiarism, a lack of human connection. I can also see a disconnect that you see in a lot of students when they had online schooling during COVID, at the height of COVID. Um, Maybe just a disconnect from education, disinterest. I could definitely see that as well. Those are definitely the biggest ones I can think of. Tanya, any more?
Yeah, so like one of the major critiques of AI in education is that it's not personable, right? But before we even had AI, students were already struggling, right? Like it was said that it was that their teaching was too impersonal, right? Because it wasn't adaptive to their learning. But then we now have a tool, a management tool, I guess we can look at that is adapting to the learning. So I do believe though that we could see investment in this in the sense that it's more of that personalized touch, right? This would mean that public schools, for example, will have to invest in AI, which is going to be a financial burden. So then we then have to look at, okay, are we going to have to give public schools more money? Is the federal government going to have to allot more money to them? Or are they schools going to have to raise taxes on their local communities, right? It comes down to who's going to be giving them more money, right? Is that something the private sector should be doing? Or is it the responsibility of the government? I, for one, think that it should be it's the federal government, give these public schools money, right? Again, their funding from the federal government is only 8.9% of their total funding. It's so low. And then we look at, for example, our big old defense budget, it's so big, right? So when we're looking or re-looking at how we divide our budget on the federal level, we should be looking at how much we should be giving more to our public schools, right? Because I'm more concerned with high poverty schools, right? Schools that are more around poverty-filled areas. I'm not really concerned about high income neighborhoods. I'm sorry to say this, but because they have the tools at hand. They're inherently going to be getting more money because their income rate is higher, right? So they're getting taxed. The tax dollars they're getting from neighborhoods are more. So they're already at an advantage. Okay, if that's a fact, and we all can see that as a fact, that's just true. That's the rule of the game. Money makes the world go round. Okay, so then we have to be looking how we can reinvest in our lower income schools. And this could be the one of ways, and we could probably be seeing a shift then on how people view education to be. No longer can we be disillusioned by education, right? Thinking, oh, if my school doesn't care for me, why should I care about school? Right now, we want students to care. And I think right now, students feel like we don't care about them, so they're not going to care. So when they have these tools that maybe it's not as personable as having someone there, it's still personable in the sense that it's adapting to their learning abilities, right? I think that's one way we can see these, I get economic benefits, we're investing more, we're spending more. Yes, again, these isn't cheap. It's never going to be cheap, and the future isn't said to be cheap, right? I'm willing to pay more in taxes if it means that we're going to see this implemented in education. We're going to see students achieve more, because I'm all about improving the lives of our younger Americans, right? Because, they invested a lot in me. I got to invest a lot in them too.
I also want to go back to higher ed for a second when we're talking about AI. Just because I know one of the roles that Tanya said could drastically be impacted by AI in the classroom are teaching assistants, TAs. Some of their jobs or roles could just be completely wiped with this in the system. But there are some ways now that I read about not that long ago that colleges are now starting to combat it, especially the cheating concern. According to a study by the National Education Association, more than 1/4 of educators or teachers have caught their students using a chatbot or ChatGPT or any type of AI technology to cheat on their exams, cheat on their assignments, plagiarize their papers. And so when we're talking about the AI education, then we're just talking about more so like local schools, homegrown schools that are in our communities and everything. Obviously, AI presents different challenges, different benefits at a higher level. I know, Sabrina, you were just talking about that earlier, since you and your friends who study engineering kind of discussed this. Where would you see this kind of lying, especially also in that degree industry when we're talking about those classes?
I just finished my syllabus week for the fall 2023 semester. On every single one of our syllabi under the plagiarism, the plagiarism clause in the syllabi, it was stated that we are not allowed to use ChatGPT. We are not allowed to submit any work that we use ChatGPT for, as that is considered plagiarism in the school. And so one of the things that I think is most important, and a lot of colleges are lacking, are, as I've said before, and I'll keep reiterating, ethics courses on new technology, but especially on AI. For reference, I was attending Carnegie Mellon University, which is the leader in artificial intelligence education. And I believe the first or one of the first artificial intelligence undergrad programs. And from my research, it's also one of the few with a mandatory ethics in AI course. I looked at MIT and I couldn't even find an ethics in AI course in their course catalogs whatsoever. MIT is ranked at number 2 according to US News for artificial intelligence undergrad. So I think that is a course that should be available to all students. It's a course that should be available to all students, regardless of whether or not they are in a computer science program with an artificial intelligence concentration or specifically an artificial intelligence program. Because as the world is becoming more computerized and more people are becoming accustomed to using artificial intelligence, we should be made aware of the ethics of this tool that we're using. I don't think that's something that's specific to the programmers. I think that's something that everybody should use, everybody should know, everybody should have this knowledge on. And because it's decently known at this point that artificial intelligence programs inherently hold the biases of their programmers, but it's not as well known how to combat that, how to fact check what you're getting out of something like ChatGPT, which you could search for specific experts, and ChatGPT giving dead experts. That's not useful when you're looking for experts to reach out to for, say, this podcast. And that's definitely something that I could see colleges implementing, like an elective course or a few elective courses on the ethics of artificial intelligence.
This really, when Sabrina was bringing up the ethics part of it, right? Teaching how to, use AI reminds me of how Japan is really implementing it, right? They're doing it in a way that it's teaching AI competency and AI proficiency, right? So it's not more so how you're applicating AI, more so how do you understand AI. So I think when we see the emergence of AI, we need to be looking at probably classes or certificates on AI competency, right? How aware are you of how AI is used, how the data is used to form AI, right? I think we need to have that understanding first before we further implement AI in, to the masses, right? Because again, as Sabrina said, we have to look at the biases that are in AI. And it's like the iceberg model, right? We have the tip of the iceberg that's showing us, oh, it's just incorrect data, right? Where ChatGPT gives us dead experts. Well, then let's look further down the iceberg. Well, there's human biases, right? But then let's look further more down the iceberg. There's systemic biases, right? How the system has influenced certain perceptions onto, what we call human biases. So we have to have a greater understanding. But of course, that opens up a whole new conversation. Does systemic biases even exist, right? And that's something we then have to come together to collectively agree on, that system biases do exist, right? But can we get to that point without having that, conversation? But it really opens up this door of how can we govern AI in the educational field. And I think Sabrina is right in having that, ethical conversation on the competency. I think with that, we can see a decrease in people perverting the use of AI, right? But I even think in universities and high schools, there are now tools that can say, oh, this was from GPT, right? This is plagiarized, so it's not that I don't think it's a concern of cheating. I think we have to be more concerned on understanding the foundation of AI. I think that's my greatest concern when it comes to this.
Kind of going back now to a little bit of finances, a little bit of, as Tania said, kind of asking for more federal involvement and more national involvement when it comes to actually implementing AI in the school systems. Last May, the U.S. National Science Foundation announced a $140 million investment into artificial intelligence research at 7 universities across the country. There's also calls for more ethics training, as Sabrina spoke about earlier. And then kind of what we were also discussing, the kind of AI proof, if you will, when it comes to teachers and educators looking at these sort of models to help get the actual students' responses rather than what that student may have used AI for. So what are some of the other ways that this can be combated? And do we think that these 3 methods so far that's being done on a national scale can actually help combat the issue? What are some of the other ways that we can combat AI uses, or AI 100% just being used in assignment, just because that's one of the concerns that teachers have, is that they're not hearing their actual students' responses because the students just go into AI and using the AI response. So how can teachers combat the issue further than just the 3 points that we kind of stated?
It really comes down to trust, but also there are already check back methods. There's like Chegg, where teachers can use to say, oh, was this plagiarized from ChatGPT? Those like checks and balances are already there, but let's say a student can bypass Chegg software, can bypass the plagiarism software that checks on ChatGPT. Then we have to be looking at, okay, if we're going to implement AI, okay, how are we going to improve our plagiarism systems, right? But also, how much do we trust our students to be actually doing the work? And if they are cheating, well, let's look into the why are they cheating? Do they not understand what is being taught to them? Do they feel that they don't have the right support system or the right resources? Because again, I'm always going to bring it back into the educational system in the US, right? Students right now don't feel supported. So they resort to cheating. They resort to just not learning, right? And it comes down to the resources they have at hand. So maybe with the new resource of AI as an adaptive learning and managing students' study plans and teacher study plans, could we see a decrease in this? But maybe that's just me looking at the good side of things. But let's look at the bad side of things. Let me contend with that. Let's say, despite adaptive modeling, they still want to cheat. They want to say, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't care because AIs could do it for me. Well, then they're going to suffer, right? They're going to reap the consequences at that point. What more can we do if not assist them, right? So I would say at the end of the day, they're going to bear the consequences. I hate to be that person, but they're just going to see how bad it is for them, right? We can teach them, we can tell them how to use this ethically, but if they don't do well, they'll reap the consequences. That's as much as we can ask for what drawbacks, the consequences, how to teach them. Well, we only teach them by having people face consequences because of that, right? In higher ed, your degree is going to be taken away, right? In higher ed, you're going to be expelled, okay? And that's going to be on your academic record that you got expelled from university. And when they ask why, oh, plagiarism. Oh, how embarrassing, okay? It's the same way that's going to happen in secondary school, right? Were you expelled from high school? Yeah, why? Oh, plagiarism. Again, how embarrassing. So I think the fact that that's, that's going to be on someone's record, right? That we can see less instances of this. Of course, we're going to see instances of cheating, but hopefully with the education of AI, we can see the understanding application of AI. I know it's a lot of mumbo jumbo, but it's the best as I get in terms of how to deal with cheating with AI.
Completely agree with what Tania says. We have to first address how these students are learning, assess how they're learning. If like if 50% of a class, even maybe I'd say 45% of a class and up is using something like ChatGPT to do their assignments, maybe that should be a sign for the teacher to reassess their teaching methods and ask the class, are you understanding what I'm teaching? Are you understanding these concepts? Because that's the job of a teacher, not to just push students through and get an A, not to make them struggle for the A. The job of the teacher is to teach the students, especially in elementary school, middle school, high school even. And Tania's right, that'll be on their permanent record if it is a genuine plagiarism problem, if these students really don't care. But this question, it shouldn't just be, are the students plagiarizing because they don't care, especially when they're so young. We also have to look at extenuating circumstances. Do they have something going on in their home lives? Do they have other circumstances that is making it difficult for them to learn? And how can the U.S. government support these schools and support these students, especially in low-income parts of the country? And that's probably the best way to even combat that cheating, because in my experience with the people I know, like it's not that like my classmates, my friends, like couldn't do the work. It's that sometimes couldn't do the work because they didn't care. It's that they couldn't do the work because of other circumstances. That they couldn't do the work because their family didn't have enough money, so they had to work to help support their families, especially in high school. It's that sometimes they were food insecure. These are other situations that we need to think about when we're talking about plagiarism, and especially with a tool that you can use like ChatGPT.
I'm going to give a quick example, right, on student learning, right? Because I think this is I'm all about students and just improving all that and really helping us understand AI's application, right? Because I'm someone I have ADHD, right? I cannot sit in one place. I have trouble learning in the traditional way we learn. I cannot just listen to what someone says and then understand it. I just can't do that. I can't pay attention long enough. And I can't just sit in one place. I was a nuisance to my teachers, right? But then again, I then had to learn things myself, right? After the classes, after those 8-hour days, I had to go home and be like, okay, what did I learn, right? I had to readapt the learning plan to me, to my learning abilities, right? Because I'm not an auditory learner. Baby guys, I am someone who has to touch the things to really understand. I have to really, feel it. I can't just hear it. I'm a mixture of every learning type there is. So I think with those who have learning challenges like me, like ADHD, maybe even dyslexia, right? This adaptive learning could help them. So we can see more individuals who have dyslexia, ADHD become more confident in schools. Because I cannot tell you how many people who I've met in college who still don't know how to study because of their learning disabilities, because of ADHD, right? ADHD is under the umbrella term of learning disabilities, right? So probably with AI capabilities, we can see, more confidence bringing in. We can see, again, the disillusionment of higher education decreasing. We can see more people believing in themselves and then wanting to be challenged, right? And I think one of the biggest questions coming from this discussion is it worth investing in AI even with the potential drawbacks? Are we willing to invest in, even if, let's say, for example, we see people being pushed out of jobs, even if we no longer have that personal touch in education, right? Are we willing to have those potential drawbacks if it means, pushing the US forward, if it means the chance, not the, the chance that we can improve US education? What do we think of that?
And I think that's actually the perfect kind of jumping point to our last question to kind of wrap things up here. When we are talking about the future of AI, when we're talking about what needs to be done to further invest in it, to further help students out, to further help educators out, where do you see AI going as far as education goes in the future?
I would say that if we look at the facts, right, at the current state of education, I know I said this fact a lot throughout the discussion, but it's really important, right, that the fact that the US is at the bottom among the industrial nations in terms of education. And as of June 2023, we have seen decrease in points in terms of mathematics and science. These are facts. These aren't my feelings getting into this. These are plain old facts that the US education system is not up to par in terms of the global community. We are falling behind. And, that's just what it is. This is not a liberal perspective. It's not a Republican perspective. This is the facts. Read it and weep, right? So the fact, this is our point. That's what it is. We have to be looking at what we could be doing to improve the US education system. And if money hasn't proved to be the way, because we're so torn apart how much money schools should be getting, but we're really want to be competitive in the global community. We want to be competitive against China, right? That could be a ringing point. If China's investing in AI, well, we want to be on par with them. Maybe we should be investing with them as well. If Japan's investing in them, we want to be on par with them as well, right? Because they're number one in education, right? So again, if we want to be competitive again, we want to make America competitive again, right? Again, make America great again, or whatever, how you want to call it. We have to be looking at what we could be doing and what we are doing, because it looks like we aren't doing enough for our education system, right? We aren't doing enough for our students, for our teachers who are quitting in masses because they don't feel supported. So I think that in the future of AI is really going to come down to, are we willing to do those changes? And are we willing to take those risks, right? Because these come with risk, and this is going to come with a huge financial cost. But again, if we can give so much money to Ukraine, you would think we can give a lot of money to our US education system. But then again, that's my own perspective.
Completely agree that the US should be looking at what other countries are doing, such as Japan, number one in education in the world. Look at what they're doing, maybe borrow from them, definitely borrow from them, because the US has been slipping as far as education is concerned.
We're just not number one. We're not even in the top 3. That's what I know. That's the facts. I cannot go back, in the historical perspective, right? But I know that we even introduced early education very late compared to other industrialized countries. Maybe that late start hurt us, but also the disagreements, the partisanship among education, right? How it's so heavily debated whether or not we should give them a lot of money, that prevents us from really just thinking of rethinking or reinvesting in education. So I really wish education wasn't such a partisan topic, that we could get into deeper discussions. But it's organizations like our national conversation that are looking into what are the facts and what are the biggest problems and what could be the solutions that could get us into the right avenue, into the right policymakers table, right? To say, okay, this is a great concern. What are we doing? What should we be doing, right? For example, for infrastructure, we're looking at educational issues, right? We're looking at what's the biggest problem. What are the heavy partisan debates concerning education? And we're coming up with solutions to mend these ideas, right? So not just taking into consideration what the liberals are saying, but also what the Republicans saying, because these are valid concerns, right? So I think having that shift, could we see, growth of U.S. education?
I think that the U.S. education system should be more focused on educating its children, educating the next generation, ensuring kids have the skills necessary to go out and be adults and contributing in society, and they don't feel so disenfranchised by education, by educators, and by the systems around them. And that does start in schools, and that does start with the kind of funding that schools get, that starts with the way these kids are educated, especially like Tania said, with kids who have learning disabilities, and with kids who have disabilities in general. Something like AI could help them. I had health problems a few years ago, and that greatly affected my ability to go to school and attend classes. Having more access to technology, something like a more adaptive learning strategy that artificial intelligence can bring us, definitely could have helped me out, like when I needed that. And because it's not just about mental health, it's not just about learning disabilities, it's also about physical health, because they are interconnected. Your mental health affects your physical health, does affect your mental health, and they both affect your ability to learn. So if these kids who might not thrive in a traditional school system, traditional education system, American education system for K through 12, can have a more adaptive classroom, a more adaptive education system in general, then they can succeed in a way that they haven't been given the opportunity to do, like for their whole lives up to this point.
Hopefully, as more time goes on, we start to actually see more investment into this, as we are starting to see it coming out to play in other industries. So thank you both for speaking on this very changing, very timely subject. I think we'll definitely be hearing more about this as time goes on. This was to allow us to explain. If you want to listen to our past episodes and hear from other different panelists on a variety of issues, feel free to hop onto our Spotify page or wherever you listen to your podcast from. We'll be back soon with our next episode, but until then, have a great one. This podcast was brought to you by Our National Conversation, a place where students generate policy solutions to the biggest problems facing America. Join us in freeing political dialogue from hyperpartisanship. To learn more about what you heard today, check us out at ournationalconversation.org. You can also follow us on social media at Our National Conversation to show your support and keep up with our latest efforts.